My Aunt Ruth left me 3 things when she died. A handwritten letter I still haven't opened, a bookshop on Maple Street that hadn't turned a profit in 2 years, and a woman named Iris who refused to let me sell either one. I didn't know about Iris until I showed up with a realtor. His name was Todd. He wore a suit that fit like a promise he couldn't keep, and he kept calling the building the property. Not the bookshop, not Ruth's place, the property. We pulled up on a Tuesday morning in late October. The kind of morning where the sky can't decide between gray and gold, so it tries both. Maple Street looked like a postcard somebody had forgotten to send. Brick storefronts with hand-painted signs. A coffee shop on the corner with chalkboard specials nobody had updated since September. And there, between a hardware store and a florist, was a narrow green door with gold lettering that read Ruth's pages. I hadn't been here in 11 years. Todd checked his phone. Square footage is decent for the block. If we got the interior, open up the floor plan, you could get a restaurant tenant in here by spring. I stared at the green door. Mr. Cole? Yeah, I said. Let's go in. My name is Garrett Cole. I'm 38. I build bridges for a living, which sounds like a metaphor but isn't. Civil engineer. State contracts, mostly highway overpasses in rural counties where the soil is bad and the budgets are worse. I measure twice, cut once, and triple-check the math before I sign anything. That's how I live, too. Or how I used to think I lived, before a woman named Catherine spent 4 years proving that careful planning doesn't protect you from someone who just stops loving you. The engagement ended 3 years ago. Not with a fight, not with a betrayal. With a Tuesday afternoon phone call where she said, "I think we both know this isn't working," and I said, "Yeah," because I did know, and because saying it first would have meant admitting I'd felt it for months. Catherine got married last spring. I found out through a mutual friend's Instagram story. The groom looked like a man who didn't triple-check anything. Good for him. I wasn't bitter. Bitter implies you're still arguing with something. I was just empty in a specific place. The way a house feels when someone moves out and takes the coffee table, but leaves the outline in the carpet. Then Aunt Ruth died. Ruth was my mother's older sister. She never married, never wanted to, and spent 40 years running a bookshop in a town I'd visited every summer as a kid. When I was 10, she taught me that a good book smells like dust and possibility. When I was 14, she caught me reading Hemingway and told me he was overrated, but that I should finish it anyway because discipline matters more than taste. When I was 27, she called me on a random Thursday to say she'd read every bridge engineering manual at the library, and that my profession was heroic but deeply boring. I loved her in the way you love someone who sees through you and doesn't look away. She died in August, pancreatic cancer. Fast and quiet, like she'd negotiated with it. By the time the family found out it was serious, she had 2 weeks left. I drove 14 hours to see her in the hospice, but she was unconscious when I arrived. I sat with her for 3 hours, held her hand, told her about a bridge I was building in Dawson County that kept having drainage problems. She would have called it deeply boring. The lawyer's office called me 6 days after the funeral. Ruth had left me everything. The bookshop, the apartment above it, and a sealed envelope with my name on it, in her handwriting. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind she used for letters she considered important. I put it in my glove compartment and drove home. That was 2 months ago. The envelope was still in the glove compartment, still sealed. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, but the truth was simpler than that. Opening Ruth's last words meant she was finished talking, and I wasn't ready for that yet. So instead, I called a realtor. Todd had the key from the estate attorney. He turned it in the lock, and the green door swung open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the bookshop looked like a photograph someone had left in a drawer too long. Warm wooden shelves, floor to ceiling, crammed with books whose spines had faded to soft pastels. A reading nook by the window, with 2 armchairs upholstered in burgundy velvet, one of them permanently dented from Ruth's shape. A checkout counter made from reclaimed barnwood. Behind it, a corkboard pinned thick with notes, receipts, and a Polaroid of Ruth holding a cat that I'm fairly sure wasn't hers. The air smelled like old paper and cinnamon. Ruth used to burn cinnamon candles in the winter because she said it made people stay longer. She was right. Todd walked through the space, tapping walls and muttering about load-bearing structures. I stood by the reading nook and looked at the armchairs. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. There was an internal staircase in the back, connecting the shop to the apartment above. I'd forgotten about it. The footsteps were quick, deliberate, and heading straight for us. A woman appeared in the doorway at the bottom of the stairs. She was around 35, with dark hair, pulled back in a loose knot, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She wore a denim jacket over a gray sweater, jeans, and boots that looked like they'd walked a lot of floors. She was carrying a box of books against one hip. She looked at Todd first, then at me, then at Todd's clipboard. "No," she said. Todd blinked. "I'm sorry?" She nodded at the clipboard. "No." I stepped forward. "I'm Garrett. Garrett Cole. Ruth was my aunt." Her expression shifted. Not softened, shifted, like she was recalculating something. "I know who you are," she said. "Ruth talked about you." She set the box down on the counter. "I'm Iris. I've been running this shop for the last 3 years." I didn't know that. Ruth had never mentioned an employee, a partner, anyone. Then again, I hadn't visited in over a decade. I'd called on holidays, sent birthday cards, done the bare minimum of love, and dressed it up as respecting her independence. "Running it how?" Todd asked, in the tone of a man who sees dollar signs the way other people see sunsets. Iris looked at him the way Ruth used to look at people who mispronounced authors' names. "Ordering, shelving, managing customer relationships, running events. I do the Wednesday night book club, the Saturday children's hour, and the monthly poetry reading." She paused. "I also do the bookkeeping, which is how this place hasn't turned a profit in 2 years, and I know why." Todd raised his eyebrows. "And why is that?" "Because Ruth reinvested every cent into the community programs. The margins were thin, not terminal. The shop survived because the neighborhood needed to." She turned to me. "It can survive again, if someone gives it the chance." I could feel the calculation in the room. Todd was thinking about commercial leases and square footage value. Iris was thinking about something else entirely. And I was standing between them, holding a set of keys to a building I hadn't earned and a letter I was too scared to open. "We're just here to assess the space," I said. "You're here with a realtor," Iris said. "That's not assessing, that's listing." She wasn't wrong. Todd cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, maybe we could discuss the comps over lunch?" "Yeah," I said. "Give me a minute." Todd stepped outside, already pulling up his phone. The green door closed behind him. And then it was just me and Iris in a bookshop full of Ruth's ghost. Iris picked the box of books back up and started shelving them. Precisely. Like she knew exactly where each one belonged. She probably did. "How long did you work with her?" I asked. 3 years. "Were you close?" She slid a hardcover onto a shelf at eye level without looking. "She was the best person I've ever known." The sentence landed the way certain sentences do. Without drama, without inflation, just the quiet weight of something completely true. "I should have visited more," I said. I don't know why I said it, to her of all people, someone I'd known for 90 seconds. Iris paused, her hand still on the spine of a book. "She didn't hold it against you, she turned to face me, but she did notice." That was worse. Holding it against me would have given me something to push back on. Noticing was just Ruth, watching from a distance, loving me anyway, keeping a seat warm in case I ever came back. I looked at the reading nook, the 2 burgundy armchairs. One of them dented from Ruth, the other one worn too, worn differently, newer wear. "You sit in the other chair," I said. Iris followed my gaze. "Every morning, coffee at 7, she read, I read. We didn't talk much before 9. She said mornings were for being quiet in the same room as someone you trust." I felt my throat tighten. "Look," Iris said. She set the box down again and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not aggressive. Protective. "I know you probably want to sell, it makes financial sense. I get it. But this place isn't just a building with inventory. Ruth built something here. She made a place where people come to feel less alone." She gestured toward the corkboard behind the counter. "See those notes? Customers. People who come in every week, not because they need a book, but because they need a room where nobody is trying to sell them anything, or judge them or rush them out. Widows, retirees, teenagers who don't fit in at school." Ruth knew all their names. I looked at the corkboard. Dozens of notes, some handwritten, some typed. Thank you cards, a child's drawing of a cat surrounded by books. A funeral program with Ruth's name on it, pinned in the center. "She was the neighborhood," Iris said quietly. I didn't say anything for a while. I looked at the shelves, the nook, the light coming through the front window, the green door with the gold lettering visible from the inside. Reversed, Sigapshiktur. Ruth's pages, backwards. Like looking at something from the wrong side of time. "I'm not making any decisions today," I said finally. "But you're going to. Eventually." Iris studied me for a moment. Not the way Todd studied a building. The way you study a sentence you're trying to understand. "Ruth left you a letter," she said. I went still. "How do you know about that?" "She told me, the week before she died." Iris's voice was steady, but her hands moved to the edge of the counter, holding on. She said she'd written you something important and that you'd probably wait too long to open it. That was Ruth, predicting my evasions from beyond the grave. She was right, I said. Iris tilted her head. You haven't read it. No. Why not? I looked at the cream-colored ceiling, then at the window, then at anything that wasn't her eyes. Because once I read it, she's done talking to me. Iris was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, like she'd just recognized something she hadn't expected to find. That's the same reason I haven't cleaned out her desk upstairs. We stood in the silence of that. Two people who missed the same woman, for different reasons, in different ways, standing in the room where she'd spent 40 years doing the thing she loved. I picked up my keys from the counter. I'm going to be in town for a few days, I said, to figure things out. The apartment upstairs is still furnished. Ruth's stuff, but it's livable. That feels strange. It's less strange than a hotel. She'd want you to use it. She was probably right about that, too. I walked toward the green door, then stopped. Iris. Yeah? The shop. Is it open tomorrow? She almost smiled, almost, every day but Sunday. I'll come by. She picked up her box of books. Bring your own coffee. The machine died in September, and Ruth considered that a sign from the universe that we should support the cafe next door. I stepped outside. Todd was leaning against his car, scrolling through listings on his tablet. Ready to talk comps? He asked. I looked back through the window. Inside, Iris was shelving books again, her back to the glass, moving with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. Not yet, I said. He frowned. The market's good right now. Interest rates are favorable. If we list before the holidays, we could close by February. I said not yet. Todd studied me the way realtors study indecision, like it was a condition he could cure with the right paperwork. I'll call you, I said. I got in my car. The glove compartment was right there. Cream-colored envelope, Ruth's handwriting. My name in blue ink. I looked at it for 30 seconds. Then I closed the glove compartment, started the engine, and drove to the hardware store to buy a coffee machine. Because the one in the shop was broken, and Ruth was wrong about the universe, and some things are easier to fix than the ones that matter. That night, I lay in Ruth's apartment above the shop. Her books lined the bedroom walls. Her reading lamp was still angled toward the left side of the bed, where she'd slept. The sheets smelled like lavender and old paper. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Catherine, not because I missed her, because I was trying to remember the last time I'd let myself want something I couldn't plan for. 3 years since the breakup, 3 years of clean engineering, measure the problem, design the solution, build it right, and move to the next county. Ruth used to say that I treated my heart like a government contract. Detailed specifications, competitive bidding, penalty clauses for early termination. She wasn't wrong about that either. Downstairs, I could hear the old building settling, creaking the way wooden buildings do when the temperature drops. And somewhere in the sound, if I let myself imagine it, the faint shuffle of someone moving between shelves pulling a book, sitting down in a burgundy chair. I rolled over and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd go back to the shop, talk to Iris about the inventory, the lease, the financials, practical things, measurable things. But that wasn't why I was going back, and I knew it. I was going back because a woman I'd known for 10 minutes had looked at me like I was a sentence she was trying to understand. And somewhere under 11 years of distance and 3 years of careful emptiness, something I thought I'd measured out of my life was starting to stir. I didn't have a name for it yet. But Ruth would have. She always did. And somewhere in a cream-colored envelope in my glove compartment, she was probably already saying it. I told myself I'd give it 2 weeks. 14 days to take inventory, assess the finances, and make a rational decision about a building I had no business keeping. 2 weeks sounded responsible, measured. The kind of timeline a civil engineer gives a drainage problem before recommending demolition. Iris agreed to the arrangement with a kind of calm that made me suspect she'd expected it. 2 weeks, she said, standing behind the counter on that first morning, arms crossed. And you'll actually look at the books, not just the numbers. I look at numbers for a living. Exactly my concern. She handed me a clipboard with the inventory system Ruth had used. It was handwritten, color-coded, organized by a method I couldn't immediately identify because it wasn't alphabetical, wasn't by genre, and wasn't by publication date. What's the system? I asked. Emotional proximity. I stared at her. Ruth shelved books by how close they are in feeling, not subject. A memoir about grief sits next to a novel about a man losing his dog, which sits next to a poetry collection about winter. She said this like it was obvious. The bookshop is a map of human experience. You just have to read the coordinates. I looked at the clipboard, then at the shelves, then back at Iris. This is going to take longer than 2 weeks. She almost smiled, almost. We started that evening. Iris closed the shop at 6, flipped the sign to closed, and we began in the back corner where Ruth kept what she called the deep shelf. These were books she'd owned for decades. First editions mixed with paperbacks so worn their spines had gone soft. Some had price stickers from bookshops that no longer existed. And some had Ruth's handwriting in the margins. I found the first one on night 2, a copy of To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. The pages were yellowed and soft at the edges. And there, in blue ink in Ruth's small, careful hand, a note beside a passage about Mrs. Ramsay sitting alone. It said, "This is what it feels like to love someone who won't let you." I held the book open for a long time. "She did that," Iris said from across the room. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by stacks, sorting receipts. Annotated everything, not academic notes, personal ones. "You've read them?" "Some, not all." She paused. "I think some of them were private, but she never told me not to look." I turned the page and found another, a passage about light changing on the water. Ruth had written, "G would understand this. He builds things that cross rivers." G, that was me. My throat went tight. I closed the book carefully and set it on the counter. Iris watched me but didn't say anything. She went back to her receipts. I went back to the shelf. That became the pattern. Every evening after 6. Iris and I working through Ruth's inventory one section at a time. She knew where everything was. I knew how to build a spreadsheet. Between the two of us, we made slow, careful progress through a collection that felt less like merchandise and more like someone's interior life arranged on wooden shelves. See? We didn't talk much at first. Not because it was awkward, because the shop didn't require it. There was something about the quiet of that space after hours, the warm light from the overhead fixtures, the occasional creak of the building settling, that made conversation feel optional in the best way. When we did talk, it was about the books. "This one's a first printing," Iris said on night 3, holding up a copy of East of Eden. Ruth got it from an estate sale in 1987. She talked about it like other people talk about their wedding day. Ruth never had a wedding day. She didn't need one. She had books and opinions. I laughed. A real one. The kind that surprised me because I hadn't been expecting it. Iris looked up from the book, and something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Like she'd been waiting to hear that sound and hadn't known it until it happened. "What?" I said. "Nothing." She looked back down. "You sound like her when you laugh." That was the first time something between us felt different. Not romantic. Not yet. Just an awareness that hadn't been there before. The kind of thing you notice the way you notice a change in temperature. You don't decide to feel it, you just do. I started bringing coffee from the cafe next door. Cups every evening. Black for me. Oat milk, 1 sugar for her. I didn't ask how she took it. I just paid attention the first time she ordered and remembered. On night 4, she noticed. "You remembered. It's not complicated." "No," she said, "but most people don't bother with things that aren't complicated." She took the cup and turned back to the shelves. And I stood there, holding my black coffee like a man who had just been complimented and punished in the same sentence. That was the thing about Iris. She said things that landed in 2 places at once. Something kind on the surface, something sharper underneath, or the reverse. I couldn't always tell which layer was the real one. On night 5, I found another margin note. This one, in a copy of Persuasion by Jane Austen. Ruth had underlined a passage about Captain Wentworth writing a letter while pretending to compose something else. In the margin she'd written, "Every letter is a confession in disguise." Iris leaned over my shoulder to read it, close enough that I could smell her shampoo. Something clean, cedar maybe. She underlined that whole chapter, Iris said. "I found it last year." Did she write anything else? On the last page, Iris reached past me and turned to the back. Ruth's handwriting again, smaller this time. I should have told him when I had the chance. But I thought there would be more time. There is never more time. We both stood there, reading it. I didn't ask who Ruth meant. Iris didn't offer. After a while, she stepped back. "I'll finish the travel section." "Yeah," I said. "Okay." The shop was quiet after that, but a different kind of quiet, the kind with something living in it. On the 6th night, Mac showed up. Mac Henderson. Still my closest friend, though the word close had developed some cracks in the last year. His divorce had finalized in March, and since then he'd developed a philosophical framework built entirely on bourbon and disappointment. He called from the parking lot. "I'm outside a bookshop in a town that doesn't have a Chili's. What happened to you? Come in." He walked through the green door like a man entering a museum he'd been forced to visit on a school trip, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the shelves without reading a single spine. "So this is it," he said, "the inheritance. This is it. It smells like my grandmother's attic. That cinnamon and old paper. Same thing." He picked up a book from the nearest table, glanced at the back cover and set it down. "You've been here a week. 6 days. 6 days in a dead woman's bookshop, sorting books." He looked at me. "Garrett, what are you doing?" "Inventory. That's the word you're using." I set down my clipboard. "What word would you use?" "Hiding." He said it without malice. That was the thing about Mac. His cruelty, when it showed up, was always dressed as honesty. You're hiding in a dead woman's bookshop because going back to your actual life means making a decision. I made a decision, 2 weeks of inventory. You postponed a decision by calling the postponement a process. He leaned against the counter. "I know that move. I did it for 18 months with Sharon, called it working things out. We were just avoiding the part where somebody had to be honest. That landed. I let it. You flew here to tell me that? I drove 3 hours. Because you stopped returning texts on Wednesday, and your voicemail still has the tone of a man who thinks leaving a 2-second recording of silence is an acceptable greeting. It's efficient. It's unhinged." I picked my clipboard back up. "I'm fine, Mac. You're cataloging feelings that belong to a dead woman because you're afraid to have your own. That's the opposite of fine." The green door opened behind him. Iris came in carrying a bag from the cafe. She stopped when she saw Mac. "Hi," she said. Mac looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "Hello. Iris, this is Mac, old friend from college. Mac Iris. She runs the shop." Iris set the bag on the counter, ran it with Ruth. "Now I'm helping with inventory." "Inventory," Mac repeated, like the word itself was suspect. "Right." Iris looked at me. I could see her reading the room the way she read Ruth's shelving system, mapping the emotional coordinates, figuring out where everything sat in relation to everything else. "I brought scones," she said. "There are 3, so the math works out." Max stared at her for a second. Then a smile cracked through, the first real one I'd seen from him in months. "I like her," he said to me. "You've known her for 12 seconds. Best 12 seconds I've had since March." We ate scones in the reading nook. Mac took Ruth's chair. Iris sat on the floor with her back against the shelf. I stood by the window because the only other option was the chair next to Mac, and I didn't want to be that close to his opinions. Mac talked. That's what Mac did when he was hurting. He built a wall out of words and hid behind it. He told a story about his divorce lawyer that was funny enough to be painful. He told a story about trying to use a dating app at 40 that was painful enough to be funny. And somewhere in the middle, he said something quiet. The thing about losing someone, it doesn't matter if it's death or divorce, or just someone deciding you're not worth the effort anymore. The thing is, you keep reaching for the spot where they used to be. He looked at the bookshelf behind Iris. And every time your hand finds air instead of something solid, you have a choice. You can stop reaching, or you can fill the space with something else and pretend it's the same. The shop was very quiet. Or, Iris said softly, you can leave the space open until something real shows up. Mac looked at her. Not the way he looked at most people, already forming a response before they'd finished talking. He just looked at her. Optimistic, he said. Realistic, she said. Filling empty space with something that doesn't fit is how you end up with a room full of wrong things. Mac turned to me. She's talking about you. She's talking about furniture. Iris smiled into her coffee. After Mac left, promising to stay at a motel with a Chili's within walking distance, the shop was different. Quieter, but not in the before Mac way. In the way a room feels after someone has said something true and everyone has agreed to let it settle. I went back to the shelves. Iris went back to the receipts. We worked in silence for almost an hour. Then I found another margin note. This one was in a beaten-up copy of The Great Gatsby. Ruth had circled the line about beating on, boats against the current. In the margin she'd written, not backwards, inwards. We are born back into the parts of ourselves we haven't finished building. I read it aloud without meaning to. Iris looked up. Sorry, I said, just thinking. Don't apologize for reading Ruth's thoughts out loud. That's the closest thing to hearing her voice that either of us gets. I turned the book over in my hands. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Ruth told me the shop hasn't been profitable in 2 years. You've been here for 3. You could have left, gone somewhere that paid better. Iris was quiet for a while. She folded a receipt in half, then in half again. I had an offer, she said, last spring. Branch library in Westfield, stable hours, benefits, pension track. The kind of job people describe as sensible. And I turned it down, because Ruth asked me to stay. She asked? Iris shook her head. She didn't ask in words, she never would have. But she was getting tired, I could see it. She moved slower. She forgot things. Small things. Where she'd put the deposit bag. Which day the distributor came. Iris looked at the chair in the reading nook. She forgot to eat lunch once, and I found her sitting in that chair at 4 in the afternoon, reading with her glasses on upside down, completely content. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. So I stayed, Iris said. Not because she asked. Because leaving would have been like pulling the last thread out of something that was still holding together. She looked at me. Does that make sense? It made the kind of sense that bypasses logic entirely and lands somewhere in the chest. The kind where you recognize something in another person that you've been pretending you don't carry yourself. Yeah, I said, it does. She held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then she stood up, brushed off her jeans, and walked to the counter. I'm locking up, she said. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow. She pulled on her jacket, paused at the door, turned halfway back. Garrett. Yeah? The margin notes. Ruth wrote them over 40 years. They're not just annotations, they're a map. She adjusted her glasses on her forehead, a gesture I was starting to recognize as something she did when she was choosing her words carefully. Be careful with maps. Sometimes they show you where you're standing before you're ready to know. She left. I stood alone in the bookshop. Ruth's books surrounded me on every wall. Her notes were scattered through them like breadcrumbs. Through a forest, her chair held the dent of her body. Her cinnamon candles sat unlit on the windowsill. And somewhere in a copy of Persuasion, in Ruth's blue ink, a sentence I couldn't stop hearing. I should have told him when I had the chance. I locked the green door and walked upstairs to the apartment. I sat on Ruth's bed and looked at the ceiling. Something was happening. Something I hadn't planned for, hadn't measured, hadn't drawn up specifications for. Something in the way Iris talked about staying, in the way she read a room like it was a text with annotations. In the way she handed me coffee without asking, and smiled into her cup when she thought I wasn't watching. I picked up my phone to call Mac, then set it down. He would have something sharp to say, something true and unhelpful, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, I lay back and listened to the building settle around me, creak of wood, hum of the old radiator. The faint sound of the cafe next door closing its gate for the night. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks. But Ruth's margin notes were starting to read like warnings. And Iris was starting to feel like the answer to a question I hadn't agreed to ask. I found it on night 9, the note that changed everything. We'd been working through the poetry section. Ruth kept it in the southwest corner of the shop, between the grief shelf and the travel shelf, which made a kind of sense if you accepted her emotional mapping system. Poetry was the bridge between loss and leaving, or between loss and deciding to stay, depending on how you read it. Iris was upstairs handling a distributor invoice. I was alone on the floor with a box of chapbooks and a cup of cold coffee, pulling volumes one at a time and logging them into the spreadsheet I'd built to translate Ruth's coordinates into something a realtor could read. That sentence tasted wrong even as I thought it. The book was a slim hardcover. Mary Oliver, New and Selected Poems. The cover was soft from handling. Ruth had read this one hundreds of times. I could tell by the way the spine fell open naturally, the way certain pages had been turned so often the corners had gone round. I flipped through it. Most pages had her blue ink somewhere, a star, an underline, a single word in the margin like yes or exactly or once, inexplicably, wrong Mary. Then I reached page 47. The poem was about paying attention, about looking at the world hard enough that it starts looking back. Ruth had underlined 3 lines, and beneath them, in handwriting smaller than her usual script, like she'd been whispering to the page, she'd written this. He won't sell it, he'll think he will, but he won't. And the girl with the reading glasses will be the reason. She already is. He just doesn't know it yet. I should tell him. I should tell them both. But some things you can't hand to people. They have to trip over them. I read it twice, then 3 times, then a 4th time, just to be sure the words were real. He, the girl with reading glasses. I looked at the stairs. I could hear Iris moving around in the apartment, the creak of floorboards, the muffled sound of a filing cabinet closing. Ruth had seen this coming before I'd set foot in the shop, before I'd met Iris, before the coffee runs and the margin notes and the evenings that ran past midnight without either of us noticing. My aunt had looked at the coordinates of her own emotional map and drawn a line between 2 people who hadn't met yet. I closed the book, set it on the counter, pressed my palm flat against the cover like I could hold the words down. Then I went outside and sat on the curb in front of the green door and stared at the street until my breathing felt normal again. I didn't tell Iris about the note. Not because I was hiding it, because I didn't know what it meant yet. Or I did know and wasn't ready to say it, which amounted to the same evasion Ruth had predicted with surgical accuracy. The next morning, something shifted, not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories where somebody makes a declaration under a streetlight. It was quieter than that. It was the fact that when Iris came downstairs at 7 with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe next door, she'd remembered that I'd switched from black to 1 sugar 3 days ago without telling her. "You noticed," I said. She set the cup on the counter. "You stirred 3 times last Wednesday. You only stir when there's sugar." That's observant. That's paying attention. She sat down in Ruth's chair and opened a novel I didn't recognize. There's a difference. I sat in the other chair, the one that used to be just the other chair and was now, somehow, mine. We read in silence. The morning light came through the front window and landed on the floor between us like a third presence. And I thought, this is what Ruth meant. This is what she was writing about in all those margins. Not romance, not attraction. Just 2 people in a quiet room, paying attention to each other in ways they don't fully understand yet. It scared me more than anything Catherine had ever done. Because Catherine had been a plan, a structured, logical, well-engineered partnership between 2 adults who shared compatible goals and complementary schedules. And when it ended, I could point to the failure like a structural flaw in a blueprint. Load tolerance exceeded. Material fatigue. Predictable, if you'd been paying attention. This was different. This was sitting in a chair and feeling the air between 2 people become a living thing. No blueprint for that. No load calculations. Just the sound of 2 people turning pages in a room full of morning light. And the growing certainty that if she stopped showing up, the mornings would lose something I couldn't replace. I spent the rest of the day finding excuses to be in whatever room Iris was in. I told myself it was about the inventory. Mac called that afternoon. "So, have you kissed the book girl yet?" "Don't call her that. That's a no." "Have you told her you're definitely selling the shop?" "It's not definite." A pause on the line. Mac's pauses were never empty. They were loaded weapons he was deciding whether to fire. "Garrett, what are you doing?" "Inventory." "You keep saying that word like it means something different each time." "It does." "That's my point." I heard him shift, a chair creaking. "You do this. You did it with Catherine. You did it with the Dawson County transfer. You did it with your dad's house. Every time something good gets close enough to matter, you start building an exit. You call it planning, you call it being responsible, but it's just running with a clipboard." I didn't answer, because the thing about Mac's cruelty was that it wasn't cruel. It was honest in the way that X-rays are honest. He could see the fracture because he had the same one. "You like her," he said. "I sat in that shop for 45 minutes and watched you track her across the room like a compass needle. You made coffee for a woman whose order you memorized in less than a week, and you're sleeping in your dead aunt's apartment instead of a hotel because she told you Ruth would want you to. She was right about that. She's probably right about a lot of things, which is exactly why you're going to sell the shop and drive back to Dawson County and pretend this was all just a nice detour. You don't know that." "I know you." His voice dropped, not cruel, now tired. "I know you because I'm the same way. I watched my marriage end in slow motion because I was too scared to grab it with both hands and say this matters to me. I planned my way out of the best thing I ever had. A breath. Don't be me, Garrett." I stared at the wall of Ruth's apartment. At the bookshelves, the reading lamp, the lavender sheets. At the cream-colored envelope sitting on the nightstand where I'd moved it from the glove compartment 3 days ago. Still sealed, still waiting. Everything in that room was waiting for me to make a decision I'd been postponing since August. "I'm not selling," I said. The words surprised me. They just came out, like they'd been sitting in my chest for days, waiting for enough pressure to escape. Mac was quiet for a long time. "Okay," he said finally. "Good, now go tell her that, not me." I hung up and sat on the edge of Ruth's bed. My hands were shaking, which was absurd. I'd signed million-dollar bridge contracts without flinching. I'd stood on scaffolding 40 feet above a river and checked measurements in the wind. But saying 4 words to a friend on the phone, "I'm not selling," had knocked something loose in my chest that I didn't know how to put back. I planned to tell Iris immediately. I went downstairs that evening with the intention of saying I was keeping the shop, that the listing was going away, that I'd call Todd in the morning and cancel the whole thing. But Iris wasn't in the shop. She was in the back room, sitting at Ruth's desk. Her laptop was open, and on the screen, bright and unmistakable, was the Harmon Realty website, my list, the shop's listing. 3 exterior photos, a floor plan, and a price tag I'd approved 2 weeks ago and forgotten to take down. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. There are more of them here every week. She looked up when I walked in. The expression on her face. I've replayed it 100 times since, trying to name it. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. It was recognition. The look of someone who had suspected something and then watched the suspicion confirm itself, and was not surprised by the confirmation, only by how much it still hurt. "You listed it," she said. "Before I came here, before the inventory, before any of this. But it's still up." I opened my mouth, closed it. She was right. It was still up. I'd spent 9 days margin notes, learning Iris's coffee order, sleeping in Ruth's bed, sitting in a chair that had become mine. And the listing had been live the entire time. Anyone with a browser could find it. Anyone who walked past the Harmon Realty office could see it in the window. "I forgot," I said. Iris closed the laptop, slowly, the way you close something you don't want to slam, because slamming would give the moment more drama than it deserves. "You forgot." "I was going to take it down. I just decided tonight. I was coming down to tell you." Tonight she stood up, after 9 days. "Iris, what would have happened if I hadn't found it? Would you have told me tomorrow? Next week?" She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. "Or would you have kept sitting in that reading nook, drinking coffee I brought you, letting me believe this was going somewhere, while anyone with an internet connection could see that the answer was already decided?" The answer wasn't decided. The listing was live, Garrett. That's a decision. Everything else was just you postponing the next one. She sounded like Mac, the same diagnosis, from a completely different angle, and it landed harder because she wasn't angry. She was precise. "I'm keeping the shop," I said. She stopped at the door, didn't turn around. "You said 2 weeks. I changed my mind." "When?" "I don't know, gradually. And then all at once, about 20 minutes ago." She turned. Her eyes were bright, not with tears. With something more controlled than that. The effort of holding steady. "That's a beautiful sentence," she said quietly. "But I've spent 3 years in this shop watching Ruth pour herself into something nobody valued enough. I held her hand through medical bills she couldn't pay because the margins were too thin. I skipped a pension to keep her company." Her voice cracked once, and she caught it. "I can't do this again. I can't invest in something someone else is holding at arm's length." "I'm not holding you at arm's length." "You're holding everything at arm's length. The shop, the letter, me. You keep getting close enough to care, and then you step back to measure the distance." I didn't have an answer for that, because she was right. She was exactly right, in the way that Ruth was right in her margin notes. Observing something you can't see in yourself. Iris pulled on her jacket. "I need a few days." "From the shop?" "From this." She gestured between us. The space, the air that had become a living thing. "I need to think about whether I can keep doing this with someone who's still deciding if he's staying." She left through the back door, not the green door, the back door through the alley, like she was choosing the exit that didn't pass through Ruth's space. I heard her car start, pull away. Then silence. I stood in the back room for a long time. Ruth's desk was still there, papers stacked neatly, a jar of blue pens, a framed photo of her holding a book at some event I'd never attended. The laptop was closed on the desk, still warm. I walked into the main room, turned on the lights. The shop looked different, empty. Not different bad. Different in the way a room looks when the person who makes it alive isn't there anymore. The shelves were the same, the books were the same. The burgundy chairs, the checkout counter, the corkboard with its pinned memories. The overhead lights hummed, the way they always did, a low electric sound that I'd stopped noticing until it was the only sound left. But Iris's jacket wasn't on the hook by the door. Her coffee cup wasn't on the counter. Her reading glasses weren't pushed up on her forehead. The shop still smelled like old paper and cinnamon, but without her in it, those smells felt like they belonged to a room I was visiting, not a room I was part of. I sat down in my chair, the one that had become mine without anyone assigning it. Ruth's chair was across from me, still holding the shape of her. Two empty chairs in an empty shop. I stared at them and felt the full weight of what Iris had been saying. Not just about the listing, about the way I moved through the world. Getting close enough to feel the warmth, then stepping back to take a measurement. As if knowing the temperature was the same as being warm. I pulled out my phone, opened the Harmon Realty website. The listing was right there, 3 exterior photos, a floor plan, a price tag I'd approved 2 weeks ago, 7 days on market, and 2 inquiries I hadn't responded to. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Not yet, not because I wasn't sure, because deleting it in a panic at 9:30 on a Tuesday, it was a reaction, and Iris deserved a decision. I put the phone down. On the counter where I'd left it that morning was the slim hardcover. Mary Oliver New and Selected Poems. Ruth's blue ink on page 47. He won't sell it. He'll think he will, but he won't. Ruth had been right about everything. About me, about Iris, about the shop, about the letter I still hadn't opened. She'd mapped the whole thing out in her margins like a woman annotating a novel she'd already read to the end. The only thing she'd been wrong about was the timing. She thought I'd trip over it. Instead, I'd walked straight into it, with my eyes open, measured the distance, calculated the load, and then stood there wondering why the math didn't work. Because the math never works for this. That was the whole point. That was what Ruth had been trying to tell me in 40 years of margin notes. Some things can't be engineered. Some things just have to be felt. I sat in the empty shop until midnight. The lights stayed on. The building settled around me, and somewhere upstairs, on the nightstand in Ruth's apartment, a cream-colored envelope with my name on it was waiting for me to stop measuring and start reading. Tomorrow I would pull the listing. Tomorrow I would call Iris. Tomorrow I would open the letter. But tonight I sat in the quiet and let myself feel the weight of the empty chair across from me. Both empty chairs, Ruth's and the one Iris had left behind. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't reach for a clipboard. I didn't reach for a plan. I just sat there, in the space between what I'd lost and what I hadn't earned yet, and let it be exactly as terrifying as it was. The terror didn't kill me. That was the first surprise. I sat in that shop until past 1 in the morning, feeling every second of it, and when I finally went upstairs, I didn't sleep. But I didn't run either. I lay on Ruth's bed and stared at the ceiling and let the feeling be there, uninvited and enormous, like a guest who shows up without calling and refuses to leave until you offer them a chair. By morning, I knew 2 things. I was pulling the listing, and I was opening the letter. The listing went first because it was easier. I called Todd at 7:15. He answered on the second ring, already in realtor mode, voice bright and transactional. Garrett. Good news? I'm pulling it. A pause. Pulling it as in pausing, or pulling it as in take it down, cancel the inquiries. I'm keeping the building. He was quiet for a few seconds. I could hear him recalculating commission, weighing whether to push back or accept it. He chose the professional route. You're sure? Yeah. It's a competitive market right now. If you change your mind in 6 months, the numbers won't be the same. I understand that. Another pause. Then, with the careful tone of a man who senses something personal behind a business decision, okay, I'll process the withdrawal today. You'll get the confirmation by end of business. Thanks, Todd. For what it's worth, he said, it's a nice building. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. The confirmation would come in 12 hours. 12 hours, and the last remaining evidence of my exit plan would be gone. That left the letter. It was still on the nightstand. Cream-colored envelope, heavy stock, my name in Ruth's blue ink. The handwriting was steady, which meant she'd written it early. Before the cancer got to her hands, she'd planned this. Of course, she had. Ruth planned everything except her own retirement. I picked it up, held it for a long time, turned it over. The seal was a simple flap, no wax, no ceremony. Ruth didn't believe in ceremony. She believed in saying the thing. I opened it. The letter was 2 pages. Her handwriting filled both sides of each page, small and precise, the same blue ink she used in all those margin notes. I read it standing up, then sat down and read it again. Dear Garrett, if you're reading this, 2 things are true. I'm gone and you waited too long to open this. Don't worry. I planned for both. I'm leaving you the shop. You already know that by now. What you probably don't know is why. It's not because you love books, although you do, more than you admit. And it's not because I think you'll be a good shopkeeper, because honestly, you won't be. You'll try to organize everything by logic instead of feeling, and the regulars will hate it, and you'll spend the first month arguing with a shelving system that has worked perfectly well for 40 years. I'm leaving you the shop because you need a place to stop running. You have spent 10 years building things for other people. Bridges, overpasses, drainage systems in counties you'll never visit again. You build for strangers and then you move on. That is your talent, and it is also your disease. You move before anything can settle. You measure before anything can surprise you. And when Catherine left, you did what you always do. You called it engineering. You called it discipline. You called it a clean break. But I watched you disappear into your blueprints like a man crawling into a foxhole, and I thought, he is building walls and calling them bridges. The shop doesn't need an engineer. It needs someone willing to stay in one place long enough to be known. That was always the hardest thing for you. Not the math, not the precision, the being known part. There's a woman who works here named Iris. By the time you read this, you've met her. If I know you, and I do, you've already started finding reasons to be in whatever room she's in. Don't pretend you haven't. I could predict it because I know you, and because I know her, and because I have spent 40 years in a bookshop watching people fall in love with the wrong books and the right people. Iris stayed when she didn't have to. She turned down a library job in Westfield to keep me company during the part of my life I couldn't do alone. That is not loyalty. That is love, the kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need an audience. She will not wait forever. She shouldn't have to. You will be tempted to plan this, to measure it, to build a careful approach with specifications and contingencies. Do not do that. She doesn't need your blueprint. She needs you to walk into the room and say the true thing without knowing what happens next. I know that scares you. It should. The things worth saying are always the ones that feel like jumping. The shop will survive. It survived me at my worst, and it will survive you at your most confused. The neighborhood needs it. Iris needs it. And you need it, even if you don't know that yet. One more thing. Stop treating your heart like a government contract. I've been telling you this for years, and you keep nodding and then doing it anyway. So I'm writing it down in a letter you can't nod at. Love isn't engineered, it's attended to. Show up. Pay attention. Let it be messy. I love you very much. I always did, even when you didn't visit. Especially then. Ruth. I set the letter down on the nightstand. I sat there for a very long time. Then I picked up my keys and drove to the only person in town I could talk to who wasn't Iris. Mac was at the diner on Route 9, the one with the Chili's adjacent menu he'd found acceptable. He was sitting in a booth by the window with a plate of eggs he wasn't eating and a cup of coffee he'd clearly been nursing for an hour. He looked up when I walked in, read my face in about 2 seconds. You opened it. Yeah. And? I slid into the booth across from him, didn't say anything for a minute. The waitress came by and I ordered coffee without looking at the menu. She knew about Iris, I said. Of course she did. Your aunt was terrifyingly perceptive. She said I build walls and call them bridges. Mac's mouth twitched. That's better than anything my therapist has ever said. I looked at the table, at my hands wrapped around the coffee cup the waitress had brought, at the grease stain on the menu I hadn't opened. I need to find Iris. Yeah, you do. I don't know what to say. Mac set his fork down, leaned back, looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, not the sharp diagnostic look, the one that cut to expose fractures. Something quieter than that, tired but not bitter. Can I tell you something? You're going to, regardless. Probably. He looked out the window. A pickup truck passed. The morning was cold and bright. I've been telling myself for months that your aunt's shop thing was a distraction, that you were hiding in a dead woman's library, that the whole Iris situation was just grief wearing a pretty face. He paused. But I was wrong. I wasn't being cynical. I was being envious. I didn't say anything. You have a chance at something. An actual, terrifying, real thing. And I sat in my apartment in Dayton and watched my marriage end, because I couldn't do what you're about to do. His voice dropped. I couldn't say the true thing. I could diagnose it, I could name the disease, I could describe the symptoms with medical precision, but I could never just look at Sharon and say I'm scared, and I don't know how to fix this, and I need you. The diner was quiet around us. Someone at the counter turned a newspaper page. So yeah, Mac said, I was envious, not cynical. I just dressed it up because envy is harder to admit. I looked at him. really looked, past the bourbon-fueled philosophical framework and the one-liners and the protective sharpness, and I saw my friend. Tired and lonely and honest for the first time in a year. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me. Go find her." "Where?" "Garrett, you know where she is." I did. I drove back to Maple Street. Her car was parked behind the hardware store. Not in front of the bookshop. Behind the hardware store, like she'd come to the neighborhood, but couldn't bring herself to walk through the green door. I found her in the cafe next door, sitting in the corner with a book open on the table that she wasn't reading. Her glasses were pushed up on her forehead. She had a cup of tea that looked untouched. She looked up when I walked in. Her expression was careful, controlled, the face of someone bracing for information they've already prepared to absorb. "I pulled the listing," I said. She didn't move. "I called Todd this morning. The shop's off the market. It's done." Iris looked at her tea, then at the book she wasn't reading, then at me. "Okay." And I opened the letter. Something changed in her face. A crack in the careful composure, thin as a hairline fracture, but I saw it. What did it say? I sat down across from her, not smoothly. I bumped the table and her tea sloshed, and I caught the cup before it spilled, which was the least graceful entrance I could have managed. She said I build walls and call them bridges. She said the shop doesn't need an engineer, she said. I stopped, breathed. She said you wouldn't wait forever, and that you shouldn't have to. Iris's eyes went bright. She was right, I said. About all of it. I've spent 3 years measuring everything, because measuring is safe. If I can calculate the load, I can predict the failure. If I can predict the failure, I don't have to feel it. I looked at her reading glasses on her forehead, at her hands wrapped around the teacup, at the way she was watching me like she was reading a page she'd been waiting to reach. But I can't measure this. I've been trying. It doesn't work. You don't fit in a spreadsheet. You don't fit in a blueprint. I ran out of prepared words, which was the point. You just showed up in a bookshop and started paying attention to me in ways I wasn't ready for, and then I started paying attention back. And now I'm sitting in a cafe with tea on my sleeve, telling you that I'm scared and I don't have a plan and I'd like to stay anyway, if you'll let me. The cafe was very quiet. Iris looked at the tea stain spreading slowly across my cuff. Then she looked at my face. And for a long moment she didn't say anything. She just studied me the way she'd studied me that first day, like a sentence she was trying to understand. Then she said, "You have tea on your sleeve." I know. It's going to stain. I know that too. She almost smiled. Almost. You rehearsed part of that. The first half. The second half was panic. Which part was the second half? Everything after I can't measure this. The almost smile became a real one. Small and quiet and brighter than anything I'd earned. Ruth was right about one thing, Iris said. Just one. You are deeply boring when you're trying to be safe. She pushed the teacup aside. You're much better when you're terrified. I felt something release in my chest, not dramatically. Not the way things release in stories where the music swells and the camera pulls back. Just a small, quiet unclenching, like a fist opening. So I said. So. The shop reopens when? Tomorrow, she said, if the person who owns it shows up. He'll show up. She looked at me for another long moment. Then she reached across the table and straightened my collar where the tea stain was spreading. Her fingers brushed the side of my neck for half a second. Bring coffee, she said. The machine is still broken. The shop reopened on a Thursday. I don't remember the date. I remember the details. Iris unlocked the green door at 9. I carried in 2 cups from the cafe next door, black for me. Oat milk, 1 sugar for her. The morning was the kind of cold where your breath fogs and the sun comes through the windows at a sharp angle and makes everything look like it's been lit on purpose. The regulars came back, not all at once. In 1s and 2s, the way people returned to a place they thought they'd lost. Mrs. Ackerman with her mystery novels. The teenager with the headphones who only read graphic novels but sat in the poetry section because
it was quiet.
The retired professor who came every Tuesday to argue with Ruth about Hemingway and now stood in the doorway looking at Ruth's empty chair like he'd lost the other half of a conversation. Iris handled them. She knew every name, every order, every shelf preference. She moved through the shop the way Ruth had moved through it, with the certainty of someone who belongs. I handled the parts I was built for, the finances, the lease renewal, the insurance, and the coffee machine I'd bought at the hardware store and installed on the counter, which Iris had acknowledged with a single raised eyebrow and the words, "Ruth would have opinions about this." Ruth had opinions about everything. She'd want you to know this one would be negative. I'll note the objection. Mac came back the following weekend. He didn't say much. He sat in the reading nook with a novel Iris had picked for him, something about a fisherman in Nova Scotia, and he read quietly for 2 hours. Before he left, he found me restocking the travel section. "The shop looks good." "Thanks." He glanced toward the front where Iris was helping a customer. "She looks good in it." "Yeah. You look good in it too. Different, less like a man with a clipboard." I smiled. He smiled back. It was the first time in a long while that Mac's smile didn't have something sharp hiding behind it. It was just a smile from a friend who was trying. That night after closing, Iris and I sat in the reading nook, Ruth's chair and my chair. The shop was dark except for the reading lamp. The building settled around us the way it always did, creaks and hums, the old sounds of a place that had been holding people for 40 years. Iris had a book open on her lap. I had the spreadsheet printout on mine. Neither of us was reading. "I found another margin note today," she said. "Where?" "Poetry shelf, Elizabeth Bishop, the one about losing." "What did Ruth write?" Iris was quiet for a second. She wrote, "The art isn't in the losing, it's in the staying." I looked at the chair across from me. Ruth's dent in the cushion, Iris's jacket on the hook by the door. The green door with its gold lettering, catching the last of the streetlight from outside. "She was right about that too," I said. Iris closed her book, set it on the arm of the chair, leaned her head back and looked at the ceiling. "Are you staying?" she asked, not as a test, not as an ultimatum, just the question, clean and honest. "Yeah," I said, "I'm staying." She turned her head and looked at me. The reading lamp caught the side of her face, warm light on warm skin, and I thought about Ruth's margin note into the lighthouse, the one about loving someone who won't let you. I was letting her finally. Clumsily, imperfectly, with tea stains on my sleeve and no blueprint for what came next. But I was letting her. Iris reached across the space between the two chairs and took my hand, not dramatically, the way you pick up something that already belongs to you. We sat like that for a long time. Two people in a quiet room, paying attention to each other in ways they were only beginning to understand. The shop breathed around us. The books held their silence. And somewhere in Ruth's margins, I'm fairly sure she was writing, finally. I still keep the letter in the nightstand. I read it sometimes, late at night, when the building is settling and the streetlight comes through the curtains. Not because I need the instructions anymore. Because it's the last time Ruth talked to me, and I don't want to stop listening. She was wrong about one thing, though. She said I wouldn't be a good shopkeeper. But I'm learning, slowly, the way you learn anything worth doing. Not by measuring it, but by showing up for it, morning after morning, and letting it teach you things you didn't know you needed. Ruth's Pages is still open, green door, gold lettering, Maple Street. The coffee machine works. The shelving system is still emotional proximity, because I tried to alphabetize it once and Iris almost ended things on the spot. The reading nook has 2 chairs, both of them worn now. If you enjoyed this story, there are more like it on this channel. Come back sometime.